Alright, are we doing the comic book rant today? Yeah, we're going to do the comic book rant today. So there's been a lot of things happening in comic books over the last couple of years, but for entirely unrelated reasons, I chose to stop collecting comic books in January of 2016. This, I guess, was about 3 or 4 years after DC started to do the whole New 52 thing. Right after Flashpoint and all that rigmarole, I was kind of lost, and I guess DC, when they did New 52, they figured, well, this could be a really good jumping on point for new readers, and what they didn't realize is that it also potentially made for a decent jumping off point for new readers too. But DC isn't doing too bad. But right after New 52, I think I was picking up... Let me see, what all was I getting into? I was on board with like all 4 of the Green Lantern series that were going on at the time. Let's see, what else was I reading? Birds of Prey, that crossed over from pre-New 52. I was into that. I think I was into 1 or 2 Batman titles. Justice League, of course, absolutely. The very first month of New 52, Justice League was the only comic book that DC published. Or not month, maybe week. We'll see. Justice League Dark. These were good, but I found myself kind of stumbling upon a couple of other titles too. I was really in awe of the artwork that was coming out for Batwoman, that beautiful, very watercolor style. Lots of distinctive character colors. You had Batwoman and her kind of alabaster and crimson, which was just really good. Maggie Sawyer with her, much more stark, earthy tones. Then I stumbled upon Demon Knights, and I had such high hopes for Demon Knights, because you had this sort of 9th century Justice League starting up with these immortal and long-lived characters. You had Sir Justin, Madame Xanadu, Jason Blood and Etrigan. You had Xanadu kind of like trying to play the two of them against each other. I thought that was excellent. That died off very quickly, though. I actually had to backtrack for issues of those, though. What bothered me, though, at the time was that in the back of Batwoman, or in the back of Demon Knights, or some of the other smaller books that I was getting into, there'd be these ads. You'd have an ad for Batman Year One, or you'd have an ad for All-Star Superman. None of these were ongoing books. These were all like limited series, but they were cramming like 4 pages of them into the back of books that I was more interested in reading. And I kind of scratched my head and was like, why isn't there a 4-page ad for Demon Knights in the back of Batman? Wouldn't that make sense? Because if you're trying to cross-pollinate between comics, do you really need to advertise Batman in the pages of Batman? Do you really need to advertise All-Star Superman in the pages of, well, Superman or Action Comics? There was also a lot of rigmarole about the renumbering of the comics. The longtime fans of Action Comics and Detective Comics in particular were upset because Action Comics was maybe 80 issues away from rolling over to number 1,000. I mean, they could still technically do it. You could still technically say, yeah, there's been 1,000 issues of Action Comics, but they're not numbered that way. And so that was a bit of a disappointment for a lot of longtime fans. But it was those ads alongside a thread that appeared in Comic Vine, which I don't go to anymore, that kind of made a light bulb go off in my head. In the forums of Comic Vine, under general discussion, someone did the very typical karma bait thread of, what's your top 3 comic book storylines of all time? And you got answers like Crisis and All-Star Superman and Return of the Dark Knight and things like that. And I was sitting there scratching my head, wondering why so many of them were limited series. I was like, why are all of these limited series? Where's like a normal string of issues from a regular Batman comic or from a regular Superman comic? Have there never been any good ones? And I'll do three right here. You got Gothic from Legends of the Dark Knight. Whatever Happened to Truth, Justice, and the American Way from Superman. I think that was Joe Kelly. Gothic was a very early Grant Morrison Batman. And we'll go with Riot at Xavier's from X-Men. 3 great stories that appeared in like normal issues of the comic book. So I kind of addressed that to the group, and I was like, hey, how come no one is naming like a series from within the series? Why are these all limited series? You know, Wonder Woman Hikatea, I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. Hikatia, I don't know. But yeah, that's what a lot of Wonder Woman, if someone mentioned a Wonder Woman storyline, that's the one they mentioned. And a lot of these were like origin retellings, and a lot of them were like hypothetical final issues. I'm kind of scratching my head, and I'm thinking back to like an old issue of Wizard magazine where they were doing this interview with a group of writers, and one of them said, you know, everybody wants to do the big sweeping arc, the epic origin, the things like that. How many writers can do like Spider-Man fights Dr. Octopus for 4 issues? You know, how many writers do that sort of thing? I mean, you can sprinkle your epic into it. There's an old episode of what was it called? Dinner for Five, which was a show hosted by Jon Favreau in the around 2003, 2004, I think. There's one episode where Kevin Smith was the guest host, and he had on there Jason Lee, Mark Hamill, Stan Lee, and J.J. Abrams. And this is like 2003, you know, 14 years before, well, 13 or 12 years before Mark Hamill and J.J. Abrams are getting together on Star Wars all of a sudden. Smith asks Stan Lee, hey, in your day, what did a comic do? What kind of numbers are we talking about? I could not believe my ears. Typical comic book, late 70s, early 80s, something along the lines of Fantastic Four or Spider-Man. 500,000. Maybe he misremembered. Maybe he was thinking like across all of the issues for the entire month, but maybe he wasn't. 500,000. I mean, they're not making huge profit from book to book, but because they got to pay the colorist and the inker and the artist and the writer and the printer, and the distributor needs their cut, and the newsstand needs their cut, so maybe they're making a ton of money each one, but holy cow! I mean, to get to those kind of numbers in the 90s, they had to do gimmicks like multiple cover issues, polybags, card inserts, crazy stuff like that. Late 70s, early 80s, they're hitting 6 figures just on storyline and art. 500,000, most books would kill for that kind of number these days. You know, what's Avengers doing last month? 30,000? But that brings me to kind of the reason why I quit comics, which is this. The best characters are not getting the best stories in the regular book anymore. If it's your intention to collect a series, you know off the bat that you are not going to get the best stories. The best stories are going to be reserved for some limited series somewhere down the road, so that DC or whoever can, you know, wave their arms and flag down, you know, non-Superman and non-Batman readers to try and bring them in. That's not really what brings readers to a book, though. It's very word of mouth, you know, or very word of internet these days. I mean, word of Mr. Miracle #1 was spreading like wildfire on videos and on message boards, and I kind of wish I could have gotten a copy, because Mr. Miracle has long been one of my favorite characters. He is married to Barda after all. It's a beautiful ravine here. But I finally said to myself, I don't want to pay, you know, for these extra 4 pages that aren't about the comic book I paid for. I mean, I know they have to use advertising, but they're advertising their own stuff! Holy cow! Quick blurb will do. So that's where it came to an end. I mean, obviously I'm in Germany now, so even if I wanted to collect, it'd be a lot more difficult. Yeah, even if I wanted to go back to collecting, it's not really plausible out here. I don't have a big home. There's not a whole lot of outlets available to go and get books in person. And from what I've been reading, it's really just not a great time to get back into it. Well, what can you do, you know?